The Indian variant of the CCP virus has been found in China. The discovery has drawn attention from hundreds of millions of people there. As thousands succumb to the virus in India, China may be taking advantage of the situation. Beijing is now further asserting its territorial claims along their shared border. Communist China's first ever anti-spy law takes effect. Authorities will now offer rewards for those that report rule breakers. We look at why the U.S. should care about Taiwan and whether America will defend the island should Beijing decide to invade. Experts explain that Taiwan's security has a lot to do with the safety of Americans. And Beijing has quietly taken control of energy suppliers around the world. But what's behind its unique shopping list? We explain in a special report. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. In a rare admission, the chief epidemiology expert at the Chinese CDC revealed that the Indian variant of the CCP virus has been found in China. At a press conference on Thursday, the Chinese expert said that some of the cities in our country have detected Indian mutant strains. People are very concerned and very worried. The Indian variant is still not well understood. Scientists are worried about the strain, but there is no consensus on it yet. They are unsure whether the variant can render previous immunity and vaccinations ineffective, and whether it is to blame for the sharp spike in cases in India. Over the past week, India has reported hundreds of thousands of new cases on a daily basis. They have severely overloaded India's health system. The Chinese CDC's admission has drawn widespread attention in China. On Chinese social media platform Weibo, the hashtag Indian variant strains detected in some cities in our country trended just hours after the CCP admitted it. As of now, the hashtag has more than 230 million views. The admission comes in contrast to Beijing's usual approach of downplaying the domestic virus situation. It is currently unknown how widespread the variant is in China. But many leaked documents in the past suggest that the pandemic in China is likely many times more severe than what the regime claims. Last year, the Epoch Times obtained a leaked document from China's Wuhan Municipal Health Commission. The document records the number of infections on particular days in Wuhan City. It shows that 91 people tested positive for the CCP virus on March 14, 2020. However, on that day, Chinese authorities only officially reported 4 virus cases in Wuhan. The number of cases on the leaked document was 22 times more than the official figure. As India struggles with a dire domestic virus situation, the Chinese regime is strengthening its position in the border dispute with India. News outlet India Today TV reports that along the disputed area on the India-China border, the Chinese army has constructed permanent structures in an attempt to assert its presence. Beijing has previously used this tactic to exert territorial claims. In the South China Sea, it has built large artificial islands in disputed waters. The Indian report comes on the same day that CCP leader Xi Jinping promised to help India with the virus situation. The two countries had a temporary military pullback in February. It led to hopes for a possible permanent disengagement, but the new Chinese structures may have just dashed those hopes. The Chinese regime's military presence there may be a long haul. Communist China's first ever anti-spy law is taking effect this week, and it has a system that rewards those that report on others. This move comes amid rising tensions between the regime and the international community over human rights issues. NTD's Becky Zhou has the story.
Communist China is rolling out its first ever anti-spy law. Under the new rules, Chinese state security agencies will closely monitor critical organizations to prevent what they call foreign infiltration. Former Chinese policeman Liu Xiaobing believes the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, is trying to create fear among the population.
The CCP wants to create an atmosphere of terror in the country for officials and people at all levels. The CCP has always used this tactic to hold on to its political power.
The CCP usually uses the term foreign infiltration to refer to ideas of freedom and democracy spreading in China. Those so-called critical organizations have to educate employees with access to sensitive information. Those workers have to obey the rules by signing a letter before taking on the jobs. Liu says the regime is trying to cover up its own crimes and prevent people from other countries from getting the evidence.
What is the CCP trying to hide? Its atrocities against the Chinese people, including Falun Gong practitioners, and the genocide against ethnic groups in Xinjiang and Tibet.
Plus, the regime will tighten its grip on students, teachers, and scholars going overseas with the new law. These people must receive education before leaving China. They might have to attend seminars or watch movies about foreign intelligence work. Upon their return, they will have to debrief and report to their workplace about everything they did outside China. CCP mouthpiece Global Times reported that a Chinese state-run company is taking the measures one step further. The company asks its workers to leave behind cell phones and laptops in China and only use new ones when they go abroad. This is to protect what they call national security stored on their devices. The CCP defines the term as any activities that might challenge the party's control over the population. While the new law may make Beijing seem like a victim of foreign espionage, the U.S. says Beijing's spies are posing the greatest long-term threat to America. According to the U.S. Justice Department, about 80% of all economic espionage cases involve Communist China as a beneficiary. So do around 60% of all trade secret theft cases. Reporting by Becky Zhou, NTD News.
Taiwan is in the news a lot, but why should the U.S. care about the Asian island? And why should the West come to its defense if China does decide to invade Taiwan? NTD's Penny Zhou has more.
The Chinese regime appears to be painting a possible invasion of Taiwan as an increasingly realistic narrative.
Taiwan must be unified with the mainland. It will happen. This is the historical trend. It won't change and will not be changed.
Beijing sent over a record number of bombers and fighters into Taiwan's air defense zone earlier this month. A Chinese military expert recently said Beijing already has a timetable. They say China's invasion will be tomorrow at its earliest, but no later than 2050. The U.S. has not announced whether it will send its military to defend Taiwan if the invasion happens. For the U.S., defending Taiwan isn't just about supporting a free democracy and a longtime ally. Experts have argued the security of Taiwan has a lot to do with the safety of Americans. A Chinese takeover of Taiwan would mean that in times of war, the Chinese regime's navy could steer its submarines into the deep ocean of the West Pacific without being detected by the U.S. Navy. Beijing could then launch ballistic missiles from those submarines with weapons in the range of a possible strike on any areas of the United States.
Now, if they were able to get outside of the South China Sea and into the Pacific, say between the first and second island chains, which would give them essentially the ability to strike all of the United States.
That's all because of Taiwan's key location. It's part of the so-called First Island Chain. China sees the chain as a series of choke points. They block its navy from expanding east and stops it from genuinely threatening the U.S. The key is the depths of the ocean in and outside of the chain.
Within the First Island Chain, the ocean is quite shallow, only 3,000 or 4,000 feet. But in the Pacific Ocean outside of the First Island Chain, depth immediately increases to over 10,000 feet.
The U.S. can easily detect Beijing's submarines when they operate in the shallow area. From there, if the submarines do something to indicate a threat to the U.S., the American Navy can quickly follow them and take action. But if these submarines travel directly from Taiwan's military ports into the deep ocean, the U.S. won't be able to detect them. By that point, not only would the entire U.S. be within the range of China's ballistic missiles,
the Chinese Communist Party's submarines could potentially travel all the way to America's west coast. The threat to U.S. national security is obvious.
Taking over Taiwan would also put Beijing one step closer to controlling the entire South China Sea.
The South China Sea is a golden waterway. Many of the world's important strategic supplies, including oil from the Middle East, are transported through it. Once the Chinese regime controls this waterway, it will have seized the ocean trade lifeline of many countries, including the U.S., Australia, Japan, and many other U.S. allies in the region. It will have a huge impact on the national security of these countries.
It's almost economic hostage-taking to the rest of the world.
Penny Zhou, NTD News.
In a sweeping new rule, recruitment companies in Taiwan are no longer allowed to list China-based job openings. In theory, this means that Taiwanese citizens won't be able to see hiring advertisements for jobs located in China. Taiwan's Labor Ministry says the new rule is meant to counter the outflow of talents from Taiwan to foreign companies, especially Chinese companies. The semiconductor industry is of particular concern. China is currently facing a chip shortage, largely due to U.S. sanctions, and Beijing is seeking to build up a self-sufficient semiconductor industry. This has led Beijing to become more assertive in targeting talented Taiwanese engineers. Taiwan's chip industry ranks second only to that of the U.S. According to Japanese news outlet Nikkei Asia, Chinese state-backed chip projects have lured more than 100 employees away from Taiwan-based top global chipmaker TSMC. Recruitment platforms that still post China-based job listings will face a fine. Those that post job listings in the chip industry will face even higher fines. Taiwan's biggest recruitment platform says so far listings for jobs located in China have already dropped by half. The new rule applies not only to Chinese companies, but also Taiwanese companies that have branches operating in China. For example, recruitment companies can no longer post openings for Taiwanese businesses, such as iPhone assemblers Foxconn and Pegatron, located in China. Hong Kong democracy activist Joshua Wong and 3 other people pleaded guilty on Friday. They admitted to participating in a commemoration of the 1989 Tiananmen massacre last year. Authorities considered the event an illegal assembly.
4 Hong Kong democracy activists, including Joshua Wong, pleaded guilty on Friday for participating in an illegal assembly on June 4th last year. That assembly was meant to commemorate the deadly 1989 crackdown on protesters in Beijing's Tiananmen Square. While commemorations for that incident are banned in mainland China, Hong Kong traditionally holds an annual vigil, the biggest globally. Last year, however, marked the first time the vigil was banned on what police said were coronavirus restrictions on group gatherings. It's expected to face a similar ban this year. Joshua Wong is one of the pro-democracy movement's most prominent activists. He is already in prison after being found guilty of participating in organizing an unauthorized assembly during the mass protests of 2019. But while in prison, he was arrested in January on suspicion of breaking the national security law, which was implemented in July last year.
Coming up, the Chinese regime appears to be hungry for foreign power grids. But what is the regime's true intentions and the potential risks of such purposes? We dive into this in a special report after the break. The Chinese Communist Party seems to have a thirst for controlling foreign power grids. Over the past 2 decades, the regime invested hundreds of billions of dollars in critical companies around the world, the same companies that control other nations' power grids. An energy network under Beijing's influence is now taking shape, but controversy is growing about the risks tied to Chinese money. Beijing's shopping spree started in the early 2000s. That's when the regime began buying stake in major energy companies across the globe. At first, the purchases were kept small, but later started to grow, expanding Chinese control of the companies. On top of that, Beijing has been known to give out loans to developing countries. After partnering with another nation, China often sends its own companies overseas to construct projects there. This also boosts its foreign influence. To build its energy network, the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, has relied on a handful of state-owned power companies. The largest include the State Grid Corporation of China, China Southern Power Grid, and the Three Gorges Corporation. Among them, the State Grid Corporation is the most powerful. It's one of the world's largest electricity companies. The massive company keeps close ties to both China's defense and intelligence agencies. Its leadership is also made up of Chinese Communist Party members. To understand the CCP strategy, we first have to understand how we get electricity. First, power plants generate electricity. Transmission lines then transport it to different regions. From there, distributors deliver it to our households and businesses. The CCP has appeared to focus on a certain step in that process: companies that transmit and distribute electricity across different countries. There are several examples. In Southeast Asia, China State Grid Corporation owns a 40% stake in the NGCP. That's the company that runs power lines in the Philippines. It serves almost 80% of all households in the country. In South America, State Grid controls over half of Chile's electricity market. It seems to have targeted the country's largest electricity distributors, completely buying one of them out and purchasing over 95% stake in another. But it doesn't end there. A different Chinese company also has a 30% stake in Chile's largest power transmission system. Nearly the entire country relies on its service. In Brazil, power distributor CPFL controls 14% of Brazil's electricity market. 80% of its stake belongs to State Grid. On top of that, Beijing also owns 12 smaller distributors. Chinese companies also have a significant presence in Europe's electricity market. In Italy, the country's national power grid is controlled by a holding company. State Grid purchased stake in that company in 2014 and now holds over 30%. In Portugal, China's Three Gorges Corporation is the biggest shareholder of EDP, the country's largest electricity producer and distributor. Three Gorges later tried to eat up the rest of the company's stake, but failed. On top of that, State Grid holds a 25% stake in Portugal's power grid operator called REN. China's state-owned companies have similar footprints in Malta, Luxembourg, and Greece. Beijing's march into the Western energy market now raising alarms. In the UK, controversy is sparking over a joint construction project where China helped build a major nuclear power plant. Security experts warn the Chinese side could build backdoors into the plant's computer systems. Those could allow Beijing to shut down Britain's energy production at will. And it's not just the UK. A Senate session in the Philippines has revealed similar concerns from some lawmakers. They say Beijing could shut down the country's power grid remotely. In Belgium and Germany, authorities blocked Chinese bids for stake in major power companies, citing national security concerns. In Australia, State Grid now owns over 40% stake in the power company Electranet. It's the only electricity transmission operator in southern Australia. State Grid also tried to buy stake in Australia's largest energy grid, Ausgrid. But then Treasurer Scott Morrison blocked the deal, saying it was against the country's national interest. A China affairs analyst says the risk of Chinese money comes with Beijing's ambition to lead the world order. To this goal,
the Chinese Communist Party has no bottom line. Among its strategies is one called unrestricted warfare, which means the party can use any person, investment strategy, or technology within its control to achieve its purposes. It has no legal or moral bottom line.
Qing says the regime can utilize and even weaponize its domestic companies quietly and without notice. If a Chinese company owns significant stake in a power grid company, it then gets a say on major decisions.
For example, whether the company should use Chinese equipment or technology.
He adds that this could also give China backdoor access to that company's power grid. But on top of the Chinese regime's far reach, there's another concern. Beijing has a history of aggression, especially toward any perceived criticism. Australia-China relations stand as one of the most recent examples. Beijing recently slapped a number of tariffs on Australian goods. It was widely seen as retaliation after Australian officials called for an independent investigation into the origins of the pandemic. Outside the West, Beijing's reach also extends to a number of developing countries. That's including Ethiopia, Egypt, Brazil, Pakistan, Laos, and Burma, also known as Myanmar. China is building or has built power grid-related construction projects in all of them, like power transmission lines or substations. Ultimately, these deals are all part of China's massive infrastructure project, the Belt and Road Initiative. Aside from power grid deals, the regime is also financing and building critical infrastructure across the globe, like ports, highways, and railroads. Critics of the program say it's part of how Beijing gains influence over other countries' lifelines, and through this, slowly builds influence to counter the West. Shifting the world order from Western democracies to its own communist control appears to be the motivator behind the Chinese regime's extensive shopping list. The director of a Beijing-funded Confucius Institute in Slovakia has been fired for threatening a local expert. This after the expert addressed Beijing's infiltration into the academic circles of the Central European country. The director of the institute began sending threatening emails to the expert and researcher. The Slovak researcher is also the head of a local think tank on Asian studies. One of the emails says, "Are you sleeping well at night? You must be under a lot of stress when you are walking down the street." What made the director send this kind of email? The researcher wrote in a research paper late last year that cooperation with Chinese entities suffers from a low level of transparency. Less than half of concluded cooperation agreements are published in the Central Registry of Contracts. The paper raised the concern that there is too little financial transparency regarding Confucius Institutes in Slovakia. It added about 1/4 of the academic interactions between the two countries involve military-linked Chinese institutions. In another paper, the same researcher reported on the Slovak government's stance towards Chinese telecom giant Huawei. The paper also cited Huawei's security risks to Slovakia. Months later, he got the threatening emails from the Confucius Institute director. And in a second email, he received another threat, saying, "Be patient, Big Brother is watching you." After the researcher reported the threats to local media, the director claimed the emails were only meant as jokes. The director further claimed that he had never heard of facial recognition technology being widely used in various parts of China, including Xinjiang, in order to suppress people. In Slovakia, there are 3 Confucius Institutes. The first one opened in 2019. The Federal Reserve Chair says he isn't worried that China has a head start in the race for a government-issued digital currency. He says it is more important to do it right than do it fast, and that China's approach wouldn't work in the U.S. anyway.
Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell says China's digital yuan cannot replace the dollar as the world's main reserve currency.
And that's because of our rule of law, our democratic institutions, which are the best in the world, our economy, our industrious people, all the things that make the United States the United States.
Powell said Wednesday he's not concerned about countries like China that move fast in launching a digital currency. What he's really concerned about is getting it right. He also noted that China's digital currency wouldn't work in the United States.
The currency that's being used in China is not one that would work here. It's one that really allows the government to see every payment that's used, for which it is used in real time.
Powell said he thinks the digital yuan has more to do with what's happening within China's own financial system and less to do with global competition.
The U.S. solar industry now has voluntary guidelines to help eliminate forced labor from the supply chain. The top trade group just unveiled it today. NTD's Patrick Hayden reports.
The top U.S. solar industry trade group has new guidelines out to identify forced labor in supply chains. Some U.S. lawmakers worry the industry is dependent on raw materials like polysilicon that are linked to work camps in China's Xinjiang region. The State Department has determined that the Chinese Communist Party is carrying out genocide there, and the U.S. banned cotton and tomato imports from the region this year. China, the world's largest maker of solar products, denies all accusations of abuse. The U.S. Solar Energy Industry Association unveiled a 40-page document that outlines measures companies should take. The guide explains how companies can identify where their source materials come from and how to trace them through the supply chain. The guide doesn't mention China specifically. UN experts and rights groups estimate over 1 million people, mainly Uyghurs, have been detained in vast camps in Xinjiang in recent years. Patrick Hayden, NTD News.
And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you next time. Don't miss out on important news. Our videos are being deleted. So if you don't want to be cut off from honest news, take a moment to sign up for our newsletter at newsletter.ntd.com so you don't lose access to NTD. Go to newsletter.ntd.com to sign up for our evening newsletter.
We have a new channel. Subscribe to us on YouTube at NTD News. Get the highlights of our news broadcast and the most important headlines that we curate especially for you.